The text arrived at 3:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I stared at the screen, letting the sheer audacity of it wash over me. It had been 8 months since I had heard a single word from any of them. 8 months of absolute punishing silence. But then, exactly 4 hours ago, a business magazine had published a feature valuing my hotel empire at $94 million. Suddenly, the silence was broken. They didn't miss me. They just realized I was finally solvent. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Have you ever had people who ignored your struggle suddenly show up for your success? I want to hear your story. I walked out of the coffee shop and toward my car. The late afternoon sun was hitting the pavement, but I felt cold. Cold in that specific hollow way that only family can make you feel. I unlocked the door of my Lucid Air, the soft click echoing in the quiet parking lot. It was a beautiful machine, sleek and powerful, purchased with the dividends of my own sweat and sleepless nights. But as I slid into the driver's seat, I wasn't thinking about the car. I was thinking about 8 months ago. I was thinking about the day I graduated from business school with my master's in hospitality management. I had walked across that stage in a sea of black gowns, my name called out over the loudspeakers. I remembered the bright lights blinding me as I looked out into the auditorium searching. I wasn't looking for applause. I was just looking for a face. Any face that belonged to me. There was no one. The seat I had reserved for my mother Cynthia was empty. The seat for my father Philip was empty. My older sister Vanessa and my younger brother Mason empty. I accepted my diploma with a smile that felt like it was carved out of glass, terrified it would shatter if I moved too quickly. 2 hours before the ceremony, my mother had sent a text. Migraine. Can't make the drive. We'll celebrate another time, sweetie. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that a headache was the only thing keeping her from seeing her middle daughter achieve something she had worked 6 years for. But we live in the age of digital receipts. Later that night, alone in my studio apartment with a takeout container and a bottle of cheap wine, I opened Instagram. And there it was. Mason had posted a story, Yacht Life with the Fam. The timestamp was from that afternoon. I watched the 15-second clip on a loop. There was my father holding a cigar, laughing at something Mason said. There was my mother, the woman with the debilitating migraine, sipping champagne in a sun hat, looking radiant. There was Vanessa posing in a bikini. They were celebrating. They just weren't celebrating me. They were celebrating Mason's 25th birthday, which was actually 3 days away, but apparently close enough to justify skipping my graduation. I didn't waste inventory on tears. I simply calculated the emotional deficit, blocked them from viewing my stories, and went back to work. That was the moment I realized I didn't have a family. I had a group of people who shared my DNA and occasionally tolerated my presence when it didn't conflict with their leisure. Now, 8 months later, my phone sat on the passenger seat, glowing with my father's demand. Family meeting. Don't be late. Most people would look at that text and see a father reaching out. They would see an olive branch. But I saw the trap. It is a specific kind of psychological violence that happens in families like mine, something I call the trap of normalized cruelty. You see, my father didn't send that text because he felt guilty. They were him punishing me. He truly believed that his silence was a disciplinary tool. He thought he had put me in a timeout, and now that I had appeared in a business magazine with a valuation of $94 million, my punishment was over. I had proven my worth. I was allowed back inside. He didn't see his behavior as cruel. He saw it as the natural order of things. I was the asset that had finally matured. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was collecting his dividends. He expected me to be grateful for the invitation to come running back like a dog that had been left outside in the rain, just happy the door was finally cracking open. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't the daughter scanning the crowd for a face that would never show up. I started the car, the engine humming to life with a quiet, lethal power. I wasn't going to this dinner to reconcile. I was going to close the account. I put the car in drive and pulled out onto the road. They wanted a family meeting. Fine. I would give them one they would never forget. I drove south, away from the city, and toward the coast. The landscape shifted from steel and glass to rolling hills and vineyards. But this wasn't the picturesque wine country you see in brochures. This was the decaying edge of it. I turned onto the long, winding driveway of the estate my great-grandfather had built. It used to be impressive. But now, as my tires crunched over the gravel, I saw the rot. The vines were overgrown and wild, choking the trellises. The main house, a sprawling mansion that had once been the envy of the county, looked like a tired old man. Paint was peeling in long gray strips. A shutter hung crookedly from a second-story window. It was a monument to mismanagement and faded glory. I parked my Lucid Air right next to my father's aging luxury sedan. The contrast was brutal. My car was silent, pristine, a marvel of modern engineering and new money. His was a relic from a decade ago, leaking oil onto the cracked pavement, a symbol of a man trying desperately to maintain an image he could no longer afford. I grabbed my leather portfolio from the passenger seat. Inside were the documents that would end this charade. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. The air smelled of damp earth and old money gone sour. I walked up the steps and didn't bother to knock. The inside was worse. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of dust and stale perfume. The furniture was the same heavy, ornate pieces that belonged in a museum, not a home. Brianna. My mother, Cynthia, appeared from the drawing room. She was wearing a silk dress that I recognized from a gala 3 years ago. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her smile bright and brittle. She rushed toward me with her arms open as if the last 8 months of silence had never happened. "Look at you," she gushed, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a restraint. She pulled back her eyes, scanning my outfit, calculating the cost of my blazer, my shoes. "And that little hotel project of yours," she continued, her voice dropping into that familiar, patronizing register. "We saw the article, 94 million. That's nice, sweetie. Really nice for a starter venture." I almost laughed. A starter venture. She was talking about a portfolio of 5 luxury boutique hotels that I had built from the ground up while her husband was drowning in debt. "It's not a project, Mother," I said, my voice cool. "It's a corporation." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then snapped back into place. Of course, of course. Come, your father is waiting in the dining room. Everyone is here." I followed her into the dining room. The long mahogany table was set for 6. My father sat at the head, looking like a king in exile. His suit was expensive but worn at the elbows. Beside him sat Vanessa, looking bored and scrolling on her phone. Mason was there too, looking tan and relaxed, probably fresh from another vacation I hadn't been invited to. Uncle Jeremiah, the family's financial advisor who had helped them run the estate into the ground, was pouring wine. "There she is," Philip said, not standing up. He gestured to the empty chair on his right. "Sit down, Brianna. We have business to discuss." I didn't sit. I stood at the end of the table, gripping my portfolio. The trap was set. The bait was laid. They thought I was the prey wandering back into the den. But they had no idea. I wasn't the prey. I was the hunter, and I had brought my own ammunition. "Hello, Philip," I said. "Nice of you to finally make time." "Sit," he commanded again, his voice sharpening. "Dinner is served." A servant I didn't recognize brought out a platter of roasted chicken. It looked dry. The vegetables were sparse. We were eating on china that was worth more than the car Mason drove, but the food itself was meager. Another symbol. All surface, no substance. I took my seat, but the napkin remained folded. My gaze drifted around the table at the people who shared my blood. My mother obsessed with appearances. My sister lost in her own vanity. My brother a perpetual child. My uncle a shark with no teeth. And my father the captain of a sinking ship, demanding I salute him as he went down. So Philip said, cutting into his chicken. "We saw the news. Congratulations are in order, I suppose." Though I always said real estate was a volatile market for a young woman. "Hospitality," I corrected. "I'm in hospitality. And the market seems to agree with me." "Semantics," he waved a hand dismissively. "The point is, you've done well, surprisingly well." He paused, taking a sip of wine. He was savoring this moment, this illusion of control. "The family business," he continued, "is facing a temporary liquidity challenge. The expansion of the golf course and spa, you remember the plans, has hit a snag. Regulatory nonsense. Delays." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "We need an infusion of capital to bridge the gap. And since you've clearly had some luck with your little hotels, we've decided to give you an opportunity." "An opportunity," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes," he said, smiling like a wolf. "An opportunity to invest, to buy your way back into the legacy. We're willing to let you come in as a junior partner, for a buy-in of $1.6 million. The room went silent. Mason smirked. Vanessa looked up from her phone. Cynthia beamed as if he had just offered me a crown jewels. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had ignored me for 8 months, who had skipped my graduation, who had treated me like a ghost until I had a net worth he could exploit, and in that moment I saw him clearly. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't a patriarch. He was a beggar in a bespoke suit. He was trying to sell me a ticket on the Titanic after it had already hit the iceberg, and he expected me to say thank you. I stared at Philip, watching the way he leaned back in his chair, swirling the cheap wine in his expensive glass. He looked so confident, so assured of his dominance. And that's when I saw it. The delusion. It wasn't just arrogance, it was a survival mechanism. He was a man standing on a crumbling foundation, pretending he was still on solid ground. I realized then that power isn't about volume. It isn't about who sits at the head of the table. It's about leverage. And Philip had none. He was renting his authority with a currency that had expired years ago. He was trading on the memory of power, hoping I wouldn't notice the accounts were empty. 1.6 million, I said, slowly testing the weight of the number. That's a very specific figure. It's what the project requires, he said smoothly. For permits, materials, to get the expansion moving again. Is it I didn't reach for my checkbook? Instead, I reached for my portfolio. The leather was cool under my fingers. Because according to my research, the expansion isn't stalled because of permits. It's stalled because you haven't paid the contractors in 6 months. The silence in the room shifted. It went from expectant to tense. Who told you that? Philip snapped, his facade cracking. Public records, I said, opening the portfolio. I pulled out a stack of documents and slid them across the mahogany table. They landed with a heavy thud. Lien filings, lawsuits from 3 different construction firms, and this. I pointed to a document on top. A foreclosure notice on the main estate. You're $8 million in debt, Philip. You don't need capital for an expansion. You need a bailout to keep the lights on. Cynthia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's not true, Philip. Tell her she's lying. Philip's face turned a mottled red. How dare you come into my house and Mason, I interrupted, turning to my brother. He shrank back in his chair. Your trust fund. The one you've been bragging about on Instagram. I slid another document across the table. It's empty, drained. Dad borrowed against it 3 years ago to cover operating costs. You've been partying on credit, little brother. Mason looked at Philip, his eyes wide with betrayal. Dad, is that true? Shut up, Philip roared, slamming his fist on the table. The silverware rattled. This is family business. You don't air our laundry like this. You made it my business when you asked for my money, I said, my voice ice cold. You invited me here under false pretenses. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a host. You wanted to bleed me dry to fix your mistakes. We gave you everything, Cynthia shrieked, standing up. This house, this life, you owe us. I owe you nothing. I stood up, matching her intensity but keeping my voice low, controlled. I built my company while you laughed at me. I saved my money while you bought yachts you couldn't afford. I am the only person at this table who actually knows how to run a business. So don't talk to me about what I owe. You ungrateful little... Philip started, standing up to loom over me. But he never finished the sentence. Because at that exact moment, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the tense room like a gunshot. Everyone froze. We all looked toward the hallway. Who would be calling at this hour? Expecting someone else to fleece, I asked. Philip glared at me, then stormed toward the door. If this is another creditor, I swear. I watched him go, a small smile playing on my lips. I knew exactly who it was. And I knew that the real show was just about to begin. Philip opened the front door, and a voice floated down the hallway, smooth, professional, and utterly out of place in this house of desperation. Good evening. My apologies for the interruption. I'm looking for Miss Brianna. Philip walked back into the dining room, looking confused and annoyed. Behind him walked Miguel. He was dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than the furniture, carrying a slim briefcase. He looked around the room, taking in the scene, the half-eaten chicken, the red faces, the tension, and didn't even blink. Miss Brianna, he said, nodding to me. Who is this? Philip demanded. And what deed? Hello, Miguel, I said, right on time. I looked at my family. They were confused, angry, but mostly scared. They sensed a shift in the wind. Philip, Cynthia, I said, this is Miguel, he's my broker. Broker? Mason asked. For the purchase I finalized today, I said. I turned to Miguel. Do you have the papers? Right here, Miguel said, opening his briefcase on the sideboard. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. I walked over and picked it up. I turned to my father. You said the expansion was stalled because of regulatory nonsense. Right. That wasn't entirely true. It was stalled because you couldn't secure the water rights. You needed the adjacent land. The old marina property. Philip went pale. That property. The owner refused to sell. He hates me. He does hate you, I agreed. But he likes money. And he really liked my offer. I dropped the document onto the table right next to the foreclosure notice. I bought it, Philip. I bought the marina. I own the water rights. I own the access road. I own the only viable path for your expansion. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging in the air waiting to drop. You bought it, Philip whispered. For us, to help the family. I laughed. It was a dark, sharp sound. For you, no. I bought it because it's a prime location for a new luxury boutique hotel. My hotel. Cynthia slumped back into her chair. Vanessa looked at me with open-mouthed horror. But, without that land, Philip stammered. Without the expansion, the estate, the loans. The bank will foreclose, I finished for him. You'll lose everything. The house, the vineyard, the legacy you're so proud of. You can't do this, Philip screamed, his face turning purple. I am your father, you have to help us, you have to sign those rights over. I don't have to do anything, I said calmly. I took the pen Miguel offered and signed the final page of the deed. The scratch of the pen on paper was the loudest sound in the world. There, I said, handing the document back to Miguel. It's done. Thank you, Miss Brianna, Miguel said. I'll file this at 8 a.m. He nodded to the room and left. I was alone with them again. But the dynamic had shifted completely. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was the landlord. Why? Cynthia wept. Why would you do this to us? Because you taught me, I said. You taught me that family is a transaction. You taught me that worth is measured in assets. So I acquired the ultimate asset. I picked up my portfolio. I'm going to build something beautiful on that marina, something successful. And every time you drive by it, living in whatever rental you can afford, you'll know that it could have been yours. All you had to do was be a father. All you had to do was show up. I turned and walked out of the dining room. Philip shouted after me threats, pleas, curses. I didn't stop. I walked out the front door, down the steps, and into the cool night air. My car was waiting. I got in, started the engine, and drove down the long driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw the lights of the house. It looked small, insignificant. As I turned onto the main road, heading back toward the city and my future, I thought about justice. People think justice is a gavel banging or a prison cell locking. But sometimes justice is a garden. I wasn't just destroying them. I was replanting.